People believe that great loves end because of a lack of feeling. That's a lie. The great love of my life didn't end because we stopped loving each other. It was lost because neither of us had the courage to swallow our pride and break the silence. I'm 75 years old today, and I say this with the weight of someone who can no longer go back. Love doesn't disappear suddenly. It's suffocated little by little, in postponed conversations, in swallowed apologies, in messages that are never sent. We convince ourselves that time will solve everything, that staying silent is maturity, that giving in is a sign of weakness. It's not. Silence doesn't protect, it pushes people away, and pride doesn't preserve dignity. It builds distances that no one can cross. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought that staying silent was a way to maintain control. Today I know that's where everything started to crumble. And the cruelest thing is realizing it too late. Because when you understand the mistake, the love that mattered is no longer there. And what comes after that discovery changes everything. Now, let me ask you something that might be bothering you while you're listening to this. Who are you losing today because of pride or silence? What conversation have you been putting off thinking there's still time? I thought so too, and time didn't wait. That's why this story continues, because it might touch exactly where it hurts you right now. Subscribe to the channel too. Keep up with what's coming next and learn from mistakes that don't necessarily have to be yours. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to know how far this message is reaching. People spend their whole lives believing that love ends due to wear and tear, routine, or lack of feeling. I also believed that for a long time. It's a comfortable explanation because it removes responsibility from us. But at 75, after losing the great love of my life, I can say with absolute certainty, love doesn't end like that. It dies when pride speaks louder and silence becomes a habit. It wasn't a big fight that separated us. There was no betrayal, no shouting, no slamming doors. What happened was something much more common, and precisely for that reason, more dangerous. There were words stuck in our throats, apologies postponed, conversations pushed aside. There was the mistaken idea that yielding meant losing, that speaking was humiliating, that remaining silent was a sign of maturity. At the time, I convinced myself I was being strong. I told myself I needed to maintain my composure, that I couldn't show weakness, that the other person also had their share of the blame. I believed that time would put everything in its place, that the dust would settle on its own. But time doesn't solve what pride creates. It only creates distance. And while I waited, the distance grew, small at first, almost imperceptible. Then it became a strange space between us, full of unspoken things. We were still there, side by side, but we weren't truly together anymore. And that's something nobody teaches. You can lose someone without that person leaving at that moment. Silence has a silent way of destroying everything. It makes us believe we're avoiding conflict, when in reality we're avoiding connection. Each day without speaking seemed harmless. Each ignored conversation seemed insignificant. I thought, I'll talk tomorrow. I'll deal with it later. It'll pass eventually. But love doesn't work that way. It needs presence, dialogue, humility. When these things are lacking, it doesn't explode. It fades. And when you realize it, it's already too dark to see the way back. The cruelest part is that, while this is happening, we don't feel immediate pain. There's no shock, no clear end. There's only a slow cooling down. And precisely because it doesn't hurt right away, we don't react. Pride disguises itself as reason. Silence disguises itself as peace. And you keep thinking you're in control, when in reality, you're already losing what matters most. Today, looking back, I can identify the exact moment I should have spoken. It wasn't a big moment. It was simple, an ordinary conversation, any given night. I just had to swallow my pride and say what I felt. I just had to be honest, vulnerable, human. But I didn't go. And that small, almost invisible choice changed my whole life. That's why I say with such conviction, it's not the lack of love that destroys great stories. It's the silence fueled by pride. And while you believe there's still time, time keeps passing. When you convince yourself that you'll solve it tomorrow, Tomorrow arrives differently. Love doesn't warn you when it's leaving. It just gets further and further away until it's no longer there. And understanding that sooner or later makes all the difference. The moment of the breakup didn't come with a bang. There wasn't a dramatic scene, no goodbye, no final definitive conversation. And perhaps that's what hurts the most when I think about it today. Everything could still have been different. The great love of my life wasn't lost on a specific day, but there was an exact point where the story changed direction, and I only realized it too late. At that time, the relationship already carried small annoyances, simple everyday things that could have been resolved with an honest conversation, a pointed comment, a look that demanded an explanation, a phrase left unresolved, nothing serious, nothing that justified an end. But even so, I chose to remain silent. I remember that situation clearly. It was an ordinary night, one of those that seemed like so many others. There was a silly misunderstanding, something that sounds ridiculous today compared to what we lost. She expected me to speak. I expected her to understand without me having to say anything. And that's where the mistake began. I thought silence was a way to maintain control, to show firmness, to not give in. In my mind, I was protecting my position. In reality, I was building a wall. And walls don't protect relationships. They separate them. The following days passed as if nothing had happened. The routine continued. The commitments continued. Life went on. But something had changed. The conversation no longer flowed the same way. The affection was there, but it seemed restrained. I felt it, but I ignored it. I thought it was a phase, that it was normal, that everything would soon work itself out. That's the big mistake. Believing that love will fix itself. It doesn't. It needs to be nurtured. And at that moment, I didn't nurture it. I preferred the comfort of pride to the discomfort of the conversation. Time passed, and what started as a slight distancing turned into a habit. We talked less about what mattered and more about superficial things. I told myself everything was fine, that it wasn't worth bringing up the subject, that reopening it could make things worse. But the truth is, not. Talking was already making things worse. I just didn't want to admit it, because admitting it meant acknowledging that I needed to take the first step, and that would hurt my pride. The revelation came much later, not at the moment of separation, but when there was nothing left to do, when the distance became definitive, when life took different paths, when silence ceased to be a choice and became a real absence. That's when I understood. The love hadn't ended that day of the argument. It began to die there. It died little by little, while I insisted on being right instead of being present. And this realization hits like a punch, because it comes accompanied by a question that won't leave my head. What if I had spoken up? Today, at 75, I know exactly where things could have been different. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was something simple, a sincere conversation, an apology, a phrase said at the right time. But I waited. I waited too long. And when I realized it, there was no more. Time. It is at this point that the story ceases to be just sadness and becomes a warning. Because what happened to me was not an exception. It's something that happens to many people every day without them realizing it. After all this, what scares me most isn't my own story, but realizing that it follows an invisible pattern that repeats itself in many people's lives. It's not bad luck. It's not destiny. It's not a lack of love. It's a silent mechanism that traps good people in mistakes that seem too small to be dangerous. The pattern always starts the same way. Someone feels hurt, upset, or misunderstood and decides not to speak. At first, this even seems sensible. The person thinks they are avoiding conflict, that they are being mature, that it's better to let the dust settle. The problem is that silence doesn't settle the dust. It buries what needs to be resolved. Over time, this silence becomes a habit. The person begins to take pride in their own resistance, their own ability to endure, and pride enters the scene disguised as dignity. The person begins to believe that yielding is losing, that apologizing is diminishing oneself, that speaking first is admitting guilt. And so, without realizing it, they exchange connection for position, meaning for reason. Love becomes conditional. I speak when the other speaks. I change when the other changes. But this rarely happens, because on the other side, often the same logic is operating. This pattern is treacherous because it doesn't hurt immediately. It sets in slowly. First, deep conversations diminish. Then, gestures of affection become more restrained. Next, uncomfortable silences emerge that no one knows how to fill. And the relationship continues to exist on the outside, but on the inside it's already weakened. People think it's a phase, that it's normal, that it happens to everyone. And it's precisely because it happens to everyone that almost no one notices the danger. Time passes and the pattern solidifies. Emotional distance becomes routine. The absence of dialogue becomes normal. When someone tries to speak, it already seems strange, out of place, too heavy. And then comes the most common and most destructive phrase, "It's too late now." This phrase is the final seal of error, because it almost always still did matter. It just doesn't matter anymore because too much waiting was done. Pride wins this silent battle, but love loses the entire war. The cruelest part of this pattern is that it makes the person feel right while everything is lost. There is no clear villain, no explicit guilt. There is only belated regret. The person goes on with their life believing they did what they could, until one day they realize they could have done something simple, spoken up. That's when it hits them. That's when the weight comes, because there's no going back when time has already taken away the opportunity. Looking back, I see this pattern with painful clarity. It repeated itself several times before the definitive end, and I ignored all the signs. I always thought there would still be another moment, another chance, another conversation. This is the great deception that keeps people trapped, believing that time is infinite when, in fact, it is relentless. And understanding this pattern doesn't change the past, but it can change what is still happening now in the life of whoever hears this story. Because recognizing the mechanism is the first step to breaking it. There comes a point when you can no longer hear this story as something distant, because at some point it stops being about me and starts being about you. The real confrontation isn't with the past, it's with the present. It's about looking at your own life now and admitting what is being done or avoided at this very moment. Who is the person you've been silently losing? Who do you expect to guess what you feel while time creates distance? Pride always offers a comfortable justification. It's not the right time. It's not worth it. I'll talk later. I used all those phrases, all of them, and none of them saved me from the loss. The real decision never seems grand. It doesn't come with music. It doesn't come with absolute certainty. It doesn't come with a guarantee of results. It comes uncomfortably. It comes as a difficult conversation, a message you're afraid to send, a truth that exposes vulnerability. And that's exactly why most people don't choose to act, because acting requires giving up being right in order to try to be together. It requires accepting that silence may seem safe, but it exacts too high a price over time. What almost no one says is that regret doesn't stem from what you tried and failed at. It stems from what you didn't try out of fear, pride, or convenience. I don't spend nights thinking about harsh words I said. I spend nights thinking about the words I didn't say, the conversations I avoided, the simple gestures that could have changed everything. The real confrontation is understanding that each day of silence is a choice, and every choice has consequences, even when we pretend they don't. Continuing in the same pattern is easy. It's comfortable. It's familiar. You keep telling yourself that everything is under control, that the feeling is still there, that you'll resolve it tomorrow. But that road leads exactly to where I ended up. The belated realization that love doesn't wait forever. The other option is to act now. Not because it's easy, but because it's still possible. There's still someone on the other side. There's still time for an honest conversation. There's still a chance to break the cycle before it closes completely. The decision isn't about guaranteeing a happy ending. It's about not carrying the weight, in the future, of knowing you stayed silent when you should have spoken. Because there's a huge difference between losing someone, despite trying, and losing someone for doing nothing. I've experienced that difference, and it changes how you sleep, how you remember, how you age. Today, at 75, I can't go back. But you still can choose. Continue feeding your pride and silence, or accept the discomfort of acting while there's still something to save. That choice seems small now, but it's precisely from these small choices that the greatest losses or the greatest turning points are born. If this story touched you, don't ignore that feeling. It exists because somewhere in your life, there's still something that can be done differently. The mistake I made doesn't need to be repeated. Comment below. Share what this message sparked in you. Sometimes, writing is the first step in breaking the silence. Leave a like. This helps this story reach more people who need to hear it now. And subscribe to the channel to continue following true stories, hard lessons, and truths that only time teaches. You still have time.